The role of governments is something we think we know very well, since they've been around for so long, but we know very little about how they really function and the reason for their existence. We need to remember that the human race on Earth has been exploited from the get-go through the setting up of a false hierarchy among equal people, wherein certain families started saying they were superior and chosen by God, quote unquote, to rule over the common people. Those are the mostly parasitic group of people known as the royal families. They in turn set up governments to assist them in the ruling and control and taxation of the common people. Over time, it was deemed most advantageous as the lower classes got bolder and bolder and demanded more accountability to put into place so-called democratic governments, where the people would think they had a voice. But do you honestly think that the old ruling classes relinquished their control that easily? Do you think honestly that government structures set up over millennia all of a sudden became beholden to the general population? That may have been the impression, but as a matter of fact, governments are still very much a tool of those old ruling classes. And as of the 18th, 19th, and the 20th centuries, the new ruling classes, the people who became ultra wealthy thanks to the industrial age, and who quickly found out they could bend any government to their will with enough money. What's more, they soon also found out that they didn't need to spend their own money, that once they got beyond a certain level of influence, they could start dipping their grubby hands into the public money, just like the old ruling classes, and start spending public money collected from you and I in order to dictate government policies that would further benefit them and their ilk, exponentially increasing their wealth. So, governments are just tools of the old and the new ruling classes. They are sharp tools or blunt tools, whatever gets the job done, but still just tools used to keep the lower classes, so-called lower classes, under control and to extract as much money as possible from them in order to keep them poor, depressed, and subsequently in ill health, easily controlled, mostly dependent on government handouts. In the meantime, national governments everywhere are busy developing secret programs and over-secret programs, spending our public money on untold secret stuff, including technology that spies on our every move, technology that can affect the way we feel and think, secret weapons of mass destruction, and much, much more. Instead of spending our public money on proper public infrastructure, on public utilities, on fully transparent government dealings and activities, on healthcare, on equitable trade, on a cleaner environment, on proper recycling, on the advancement of our health and of the technology we use every day, such as personal and commercial transport, or clean energy. But reliable clean energy, not the spotty kind like wind or solar, which is clean but you can never rely on it because it's not there all the time. And so much more. Governments are very careful to account for all the money that needs to come into their coffers. But once it's collected, they simply cannot account for how they spend it. It's like a big cups and balls trick. The money's gone, and they need more of it to keep the game going. You can be sure that in cities and towns far and wide, right now, mayors and councils and other politicians are busy coming up with new schemes to extort money from the populations in their supposed care. If they're not coming up with new ways, they're busy raising the taxes on the old ways. The goal is always the same, to bilk you out of your money. They want more of your money, and they want to do with it whatever they want to do without being accountable to you. The truth is, and it's a hard truth to admit, that no matter how small, all forms of governance become corrupt through and through, and begin to concoct more brazen and outright damning plans to grab money from people and to exert draconian control over them, as is happening right now throughout the world. One tiny example, which is very, very significant though, because it shows that no matter how small a form of government is, it still does the very same things that big governments do. Look at HOAs, homeowners associations. Even if they only govern over a very specific parts of someone's life, and they can only affect the lives of 15, 20, 30, 40 people or households, they will find ways to criminally overcharge and to make your life a living hell if you do not conform to their rules, until they drive you out of your own homes. Now you take that example and you can apply that same philosophy of doing things to all governments everywhere, big and small. For one reason or another, governments can never let people age gracefully and peacefully and enjoy the fruits of their labor that they've gathered over a lifetime of work. You can work years and years, even a lifetime, on the house of your family, on your home. You can make it as you want it to be, scrimping and saving here and there to make it more beautiful, to maybe enlarge it here and there, or to modify this and that. But these pigs, these greedy pigs, are always raising your property taxes and whatever other taxes apply to your family home. The price of utilities and the other costs associated with running a home are always increasing. So that you get to the point where your income is fixed when you're older. And that's exactly when you want to have peace and quiet and you want to enjoy your life. And that's when you have to move, because you can no longer afford to live in the home that you've worked for all of your life. That's just one very poignant example of what's going on. These pigs, and I cannot call them by any other name but pigs, they literally drive you out of your house because they are so greedy. They can never be happy with what they're getting from you. They always want more and more and more. You look everywhere throughout the world, wherever there are peaceful, nice neighborhoods and beautiful homes, you can be sure their taxes are being raised year after year after year after year, and the governments will always find ways to raise their taxes until those people have to sell their homes and move somewhere else. Governments lie to take us into wars. In the past, they could simply dictate that we're going into a certain war and take us into that war. Just look at what's happened throughout history. But nowadays, they have to make up pretexts because we're supposedly democratic. And so pretexts are made up, and people are forced to kill each other at the command of their governments. Now we need false flag events, such as 9/11. Now remember, I was on the other side of this when 9/11 came about. That's actually why I chose to go into the army a year after 9/11 and become a doctor in a military medical school. I could have very well chosen to go to a civilian medical school. I was accepted to both, but I chose to go into the military and become a military doctor because I wanted to do my bit for the country, not knowing at the time that the country had been just manipulating me and countless other people into going into wars, into doing all sorts of things to further their agendas. So I was gung-ho about this kind of stuff. But the more and more I thought about it, the more and more I read about this kind of event, the more I realized that it was simply a setup in order to take us into war and to restrict our freedoms through overarching spying on us, on our conversations, online and offline activities, and on monstrosities such as the TSA. That whole nasty, debasing, expensive security theater that is supposed to protect us. If you just stop and think about how insulting it is to us to make us take off our shoes in an airport so they can supposedly inspect for shoe bombs. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable, but people just take it and they accept it and they think their government's working for them. I don't know what would be more insulting, perhaps making you take your clothes off at the airport to make sure they don't have any bombs on you. Surely we won't get that far, right? And of course you forget that we already are there. They undress you electronically, right? They have those scanners where the TSA agents can just look at you naked on the screen. They can see exactly all of your naughty bits and all of the shapes that would make you ashamed to take your clothes off in public. They can see that right there, right now. And that's even more insulting than making you take off your shoes. And yet they still make you take your shoes off just so they can fully complete that insult against you every single time you choose to travel. And by the way, now you can't travel. And it's also for your supposed safety. Isn't that even more of an insult? Let's talk about a few more things that are good examples of how governments are not working for you. How about how government bids are won? Do you know how government bids are won? That supposedly impartial process where they pick the best bid for a government contract to win? No, it's not like that at all. The way these things are won, and remember, I've worked in government, so I know how these things work, is that if you're part of a specific ethnic group or a specific race, your bid automatically gets forwarded to the top of the pile. Also, if you know somebody in government, they can feed you certain specs so that your bid makes it to the top. It's just the way these things work. And so what you had What you had were cases where, for example, an American Indian won the contract for a certain project, but of course he was not equipped to handle that project, so he would simply subcontract it to other companies that were equipped to handle it, of course taking his part off the top. And that extra cost came from where? From our pockets. And it's like that, on and on. It's just, in some cases, it goes down 4 or 5 levels of subcontracting. Each of them adds their percentage on top of that contract till it ends up costing a ridiculous amount. But that's how government bid processes work. How about how budgets always balloon? Government budgets always balloon. Do you know why that happens? And every year it costs more and more and more and more to run the same department of the government. It's because the way this thing is structured. In government, you see, you do not get rewarded for spending less money. You actually get punished according to the system that's been set up by them, for themselves. And so fiscal responsibility is actually a big no-no for them. They have to spend the money that they themselves have budgeted for their departments every year. They have to spend that money. And even though they may be fiscally responsible throughout the normal year, and to make sure they have enough money to last them till the end of the fiscal year, towards the end of the fiscal year, as they discover they have more money than they thought in their budgets, they scramble to spend that money on all kinds of lavish purchases and all kinds of ridiculous stuff, simply to make sure they end up at the end of the fiscal year with $0 in their budgets. Because if they end up with money in their budgets at the end of the year, next year they cannot ask for that much money. They have to ask for less money because obviously they needed less of it. And so you see how every year it's guaranteed that government budgets will balloon. Every single year they get bigger and bigger and bigger, because that's how the system's been set up to incentivize that sort of irresponsible spending of public money. It's the money that comes from you and I. This actually is part of the reason why inflation exists. Inflation is another big, ridiculous nonsense that we're taught is normal, but it is not normal at all. And in part, just in part, because there's a bigger reason, a much bigger reason for inflation that maybe I'll talk about in a future video, but in part the fact that government budgets always balloon every single year, they're guaranteed to increase by something. That is why inflation happens. It's one of the reasons why inflation happens. Because when government costs, which are supposed to be fixed, always increase, obviously the value of the dollar, the value of the currency has to decrease. And so inflation is introduced in the process. Another example is just, it's a small thing, but it shows how governments work. How about a little traffic fine that I got? Not for speeding, not for doing something irresponsible in traffic, simply because I forgot to pay a road tax. Right? I simply forgot it. You pay that road tax once a year, and then if you forget to renew it by the date that it expires, then you get a traffic fine. They stop you on the street, or they send you a notice at home. We saw that for this car you did not pay the road tax. Well, first of all, I would question the existence of that road tax, because after all, governments already tax us. They should be able to manage the roads from the money they already collect from us. But they're always coming up with new taxes. That's one thing. But the other thing, which is tragicomic, is that my wife went to City Hall to pay the property taxes on our house. And she got charged for that for that traffic fine that I had on file. Apparently, it showed up in the system when she paid our property taxes. Of course, I had already paid that traffic fine. It was already fully paid, but it didn't show up in their accounting system because, once again, like I said, governments have a very difficult time accounting for the money once it's in their coffers. It doesn't behoove them to keep proper track of it, because then they can't hide it. They can't spend it in ways that they want to spend it. So I got double charged for that traffic fine. Do you think it was easy to get the money back? No. We went back to City Hall, showed them that we had already paid it. They said, oh, well, okay, well, we can't give you the money back now. We'll just apply it next year. Remind us to apply it to your property taxes next year. So this year, we went to City Hall when we were paying our property taxes, which, by the way, had grown by 30% over last year. That's government's at work for you, right? They said, oh, we can't just apply it. You have to go to this department, and you have to talk to that person, and you have to file a handwritten request to get that money given to you. And so we did that. We jumped through their stupid hoops, which are set up by them, for them, not for us. And they initially said, oh yeah, we'll just transfer that money into your bank account. Turned out, no, they couldn't do it. We had to go back in person to City Hall to get that money dispersed to us in cash. So you can see the ridiculous hoops they make you jump through after they overcharge you for something just to get something back from them. What about condo fees? I was talking about how people love to overcharge you, and HOAs always overstep their bounds. Simple example is our condo that we had in the States. Lovely, lovely area, lovely condo. We loved it. But when we moved into it, the maintenance tax on the condo was approximately $250 a month. Well, when we sold it, moved out of it, the property taxes had gotten to be over $700 a month. And that was in the course of 4 years. So in 4 years, they had not only doubled in size, but they had more than tripled. I mean, that's greed right there. It's an incredible amount of greed. But that's what all forms of government, no matter how big or how small they are, that's what they do. They get so greedy and they can never have enough money. They'll find ways to hide it. They'll find ways to reason and to say that it's needed for this and that. But no. There's no way, there's no reasonable way to account for that much of an increase without fraud, without lies. How about another example? How about when the government chose to seize all private gold in the US? You don't remember this. If you don't remember it, it probably was before your time. It's before most people's time. This happened back in the 30s, after the Federal Reserve was introduced, and the rationale for this, which should be illegal in any country in the world, that the government seizes all privately held gold from its citizens. But it happened right in the US, the beacon of freedom in the world. And the rationale that was used was that, we were in the middle of the Great Depression and we needed access to the gold. The government came up with all sorts of lies for it. And it was Roosevelt, who was president at the time, that lying swine. He issued Executive Order 6102. And through it, he forced all of the US citizens to sell their gold to the government at well below market rates. So they didn't pay the full price on that gold. They swindled the citizens into selling the gold to them at bargain bin prices. Using the Great Depression, which, by the way, was another false flag, as their excuse. And then gold ownership became illegal in the United States until the 1970s. Now, you could own jewelry made from gold, right? You could own a gold watch, but you could not own gold bullion or gold coins. You just simply could not own them, which is absolutely ridiculous if you think about the US always bragging about being the country with the most freedoms in the world, the freest country, shining example of democracy. And this kind of crap went on from the 1930s to the 1970s. What about what happened in the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, right? First of all, the government was well aware of the suspect financial dealings of the big banks, right? All of the mortgages given out to people who could not properly pay them, or those subprime rates that were being bandied about that then ballooned to ridiculous rates, and then people couldn't afford their mortgage payments. The government was fully aware of this kind of shit that was going on. And they knew of all the questionable, highly questionable, the suspect financial vehicles, because that's a term being used in the big banks, financial vehicles that were being sold about like hotcakes, but they didn't stop all of this. And after the crash, did the government step in to help the people? No, they stepped in to help the banks. The very same banks who had caused the crash. So you still think the government's got you back, right? What about now, during this worldwide pandemic, when so many people have lost their jobs and were under lockdown? Did your country's government help its people financially after it stopped them from going to work? In the US, the people got a $1,200 payment and then a $600 payment per household for a whole year of nightmarish fear and frothing from the media, plus lockdowns and loss of jobs from the government mandates. I wonder what you got in your country. I know that here in Romania, we got nothing from the government. Yeah. I guess the most appropriate example of how governments misuse their power, the power given to them by us, by the way, or that's supposed to be the scheme. But as you've hopefully gathered by now, that's not the scheme. Is what's been happening since the start of this COVIDiocy. That's what I call this period, COVIDiocy. You just step back and look at how all of the governments have been more than happy to take away our rights and jobs, to make us dependent on their handouts, to ask us to sacrifice, to tighten our belts, to put up with their nonsense, such as 1 mask, 2 masks, 3 masks. Remember when they were advising double masking and triple masking? They might as well have said that you should dab a bit of chloroform on that triple mask setup, just so you can be fully sedated and stop being a threat to them. The vaccines with so many side effects and permanent sequelae, and those are, by the way, still coming out in droves, the side effects and the sequelae. And now the mandates they're talking about, where you will not be able to have a job. You won't be able to go to a job. You won't be able to go to school or to shops or travel and more. Basically, you won't be able to make a living and you'll be locked in your homes if we do not have these so-called vaccine passports. Just to make sure that we've been injected with all of the nasty stuff on their vaccine schedules, all in the name of a virus with a 99.6% survival rate. If this isn't the final proof that governments should never be trusted, should never be given power, should never be given money, but should be tightly and constantly supervised by us, the people, then I don't know what else to say. This is where we're going, folks. You may choose to close your eyes to all of this. You may choose to lean back into the comfort of the programming offered to you by the establishment and think that everything's going to be okay, that we're going to come back to some sort of normal, and we're going to forget about this COVIDiocy. I'm sorry, but it doesn't look like that's the case. If you choose to think that way, you are a COVIDiot. And you can trust me when I say this, they're laughing at you behind your back. They were laughing at you when they advised double masking and triple masking. They're laughing at you when they locked you in your home in the name of a virus with a 99.6% survival rate. They're laughing at you now because they think they got you good with this COVIDiocy and with these vaccine passports. And if you don't wake up, if you don't demand your rights, it's just going to get worse and worse and worse. And this vice that has been tightening its grip on you, on your wallet, on your freedoms, it's just going to get tighter. I don't know how else to put it. You guys got to wake up. You have to wake up and realize the world isn't built for your comfort, for your freedom. It's built for the comfort and the freedom of a few who are stepping on your throats right now and demanding more and more and more from you. While you've been in a lockdown, the ultra-rich have been traveling the world over in private jets. They've not been under lockdown. They've made more and more and more money from all of this nonsense. They won't be the ones affected by the vaccine passports. You will. As the governments throughout the world raise the taxes during a pandemic, and you're forced to fork over money from I don't know where, honestly, you can be sure that government officials won't be suffering. And the ones that are controlling the governments, using them as their own personal tools, will not be suffering. You've got to wake up. This is not a conspiracy theory. You just have to open your eyes and look at the situation and see what's going on. But so many people find it so difficult to open their eyes. They prefer to sit back in that comfort zone, and they prefer to not think about this stuff. But pretty soon you'll be stifled. You'll have so many boots on your throat, you won't be able to breathe. Gotta wake up. I don't know how else to say it. Till next time, if there is a next time.